would like to start with the scientific session, and I'm so pleased to welcome our speaker for today, who doesn't actually need any introduction. His name is, I think, sufficient. Dr. Upendra Kaul, Chairman Cardiology, Dean Academic and Research at Batra Hospital and Medical Research Center, New Delhi. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Simi. It's a pleasure to be with all of you and all the persons who are logged in to talk about a very topical and a very common problem seen not only by cardiologists, it's seen by physicians, it's seen by general practitioners, and it has to be managed wherever the patient comes because early management is the key. Let me share my slides. Can I share my slides? Okay. Can you see the slide? Hello?
Not yet, sir.
I shared it.
So if you can use the green tab at the bottom, share.
Yeah, I did that only actually. Just a minute.
Should we share?
Because I have some PowerPoints, I have some what is called as the running slides towards the angiogram. So
Okay.
I just see.
So help me, I'll share the screen now.
Okay. Now.
I
Okay.
hope our screens are visible now.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, good. So let's start. I'm sorry for a little hitch in the beginning. What we're going to talk about, because we're talking about acute coronary syndrome, and we're also talking about the present era in which COVID infection is rampant. It is increasing in numbers all over the country. And I think we're going to cross a huge figure of 5 million. So what is COVID and how does COVID influence heart? COVID itself, as you know, can lead to myocardial injury. Although the virus gets in from the droplets into the lungs, but from there, heart can get involved in a number of ways. Number one, it can get involved because of the contiguity, because lung and heart are in close proximity in the mediastinum, so the inflammation from the lung can transfer to the heart. And also heart can directly get affected because the ACE2 receptors to which the spikes of the well-known COVID virus can get attached, and that can produce starting damage, inflammation, hypercoagulopathy, and then the blood vessels, the arteries which are supplying the heart can get a thrombus formation or a clot formation, and you can have a heart attack or what we call as a type 1 myocardial infarction, the infarction which we very often I see as a clinician, the patient comes with chest pain and ECG changes. Can I do the next slide? Now, this is how it happens. The viral infection comes, it affects the lungs, and from there, it can get hypoxia, hypoxic injury to the heart, and the heart gets involved by getting inflamed, and because of that, the action gets reduced. At the same time, if the person is of an age group or has got existing coronary artery disease, because of the inflammation, which is generalized inflammation throughout the body, the inflammation is there, so the artery can get into that process of inflammation. The endothelial, the layer which is protecting the vessel wall, gets inflamed and the clot forms, and it forms what we call as the acute coronary syndrome. That means a kind of occlusion. If it is complete, it produces a frank ST elevation MI if it is incomplete, but at the same time, platelets get adhered, the platelets get injured, you get what is called as a non-ST myocardial infarction. So this viral infection can trigger this directly or indirectly. Next slide, please. Now, this is looks a complex, but it's a very simple slide that, when the virus comes in, it attacks the myocardium. It produces inflammation here. And because of the inflammation, the what is called as a cytokine storm. There's a large number of uh, endorphins, the endoorgan damage, the interleukins, they all get liberated and produce severe inflammation of the heart called myocarditis, and that myocarditis can produce heart failure. At the same time, microvascular dysfunction can occur, and then acute coronary syndrome can occur because of that artery getting occluded, and that also leads to a vicious cycle of a heart attack and a heart failure. And both of them can lead to a serious disorder of the rhythm. That is, it can be a ventricular tachycardia, fibrillation, and patient can just suddenly drop dead. So it's a mechanism which looks complex, but it's all based upon the inflammation which this viral infection produces either directly or indirectly. Next, please. Now, we already talked about that how did it come to light? Because the persons who got involved in COVID and were severely hypoxic, the enzyme levels, the blood test levels of these patients showed as if there is a marked damage to the heart. Uh, Increase in the troponin levels, increase in the what is called as the BNP level, that is the beta natriuretic peptide, that means uh, more fluid retention and a stretch on the heart. And then without leading to a occlusion of the coronary artery, one can get more demand from the heart muscle, and the supply, despite there not being any obstruction, becomes less. That's called a demand mismatch. Similarly, pulmonary emboli can occur, clots in the lungs, and that can lead to increase on the output strain on the right ventricle, and this is all immune mediated inflammatory response, and a myocarditis occurs. And sometimes the clinical picture is classical picture of a heart attack with the ECG showing marked ST elevation, but you do a coronary angiogram, which you should if you are suspecting arteries are absolutely normal. Or the catecholamine gush or the rush is so much that the sympathetic drive leads to damage to the heart muscle, which is reversible. It's also called a stress cardiomyopathy, first described long back in Japan, called the Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, which can initiate a cardiac arrhythmia. Next slide, please. Next slide. Can I have the next? Yes. Now, that's what can happen is that the patient can have a classical changes of myocardial infarction. And now we should never forget that myocardial infarction, whether it is non-ST elevation or ST elevation, has a particular algorithm by which the patient is managed. Like if it is a non-ST elevation MI, there's a classical chest pain, there could be some ECG change, which is not ST elevation, ST depression could be there, biomarkers are released, and we need to promptly administer antiplatelet drugs like aspirin, clopidogrel, or some of the newer antiplatelet agents. They require high dose of statins, beta blockers, and ACE inhibitors or ARBs. In the initial period, it was thought that because it is the ACE2 receptor which gets involved, that some of the drugs like lisinopril and Ramipril and ARBs should not be given, but that was, you know, this myth was uh, clearly sorted out easily by European Cardiology Society and the American College of Cardiology that they are very safe. So these guidelines are holding good for COVID positive patients also. Patients who go on for ischemia, one has to once again find out how much ischemia is there, and there are scores which we use for usual management of non-ST elevation MI, like the TIMI score or the Gray score, and that is used. Sometimes it becomes difficult to differentiate from generalized disorder of the myocardium, cardiomyopathy-like picture, from acute heart attack in which one of the regions of the heart has got a contraction abnormality. And an echocardiogram can be useful in that. Next slide, please. Like doing an echocardiography can tell you that this is a problem of a region, that is ventricular volume of a particular kind is deranged, wall motion is abnormal in one particular area, and one can measure the systolic function, one can do the diastolic function. But while doing echocardiography also in this era, one has to be very careful that safety protocols for the echo machines and the sanitization of the transducers which we use is mandatory. Next slide. If it is an ST elevation MI, that means a frank heart attack with ST elevation, the best option, like we say today, is primary angioplasty. Take the patient to a cath lab as early as possible. We know that this option has got some limitations in our country, especially in the non-metro cities, periphery, where the cath labs are not available all the time. So in such situations, I think we have to go back and use clot buster medicines to dissolve the clot. And in these patients, we also would like to find out, because if the patient is going for a primary angioplasty, we must know whether the patient is a COVID positive patient or it's not a COVID patient, because that's very important. Because if it is a COVID positive patient and he's taken to the cath lab and the personal protection is not done by the cath lab staff, then everybody can get infected because the virus is so infective. So in that situation, one sometimes has to be very careful, and testing of the staff at times it becomes very, very important. We also know that the artery which is involved has got large body of clot, and sometimes this thrombus has to be extracted. And in general, these days, clot extraction is not performed in patients with the usual heart attack, but these patients who have got a very large burden of clot, sometimes we have to suck the clot using a special catheter. Those patients who are extremely sick, very low blood pressure, and you know that their mortality is going to be very, very high. Some of these patients are sometimes one can consider futility. That means there is no point of using your energies for such a sick patient, because you know the mortality is very high. You would rather use your resources for a person where you think that the results are going to be positive and achieving a better result. So early diagnosis of COVID is improving now, but still sometimes the result of the test is not possible within an hour or so, although rapid antigen tests are becoming available. But we know that rapid antigen tests also have got some limitation. It's a good test for screening the community, but not a particular patient who is in question. Next slide, please. So the role of thrombolysis is emerging again in such patients, and we know that the streptokinase is very widely used in our country along with heparin, and this does produce results. But if we compare it with the more modern fibrinolytic agents like tissue plasminogen inactivator, or next slide, or what is called as TNK or tenecteplase, which is a Relatively new fibrinolytic agent, about 8 or 9 years back. It has been manufactured in India also. It is genetically engineered. And the advantage is that you can give it as an intravenous bolus. It is very, very specific and produces good results in about 60% of patients. So this is the agent which is usually preferred. Next slide. Primary PCI does remain the treatment of choice, but at the same time, if you cannot offer primary PCI, that means take that patient to cath lab immediately within 1 hour or 90 minutes, has been shown that if you give thrombolytic agent first, you gain time, especially when you use agents like tenecteplase, and the window to open the artery, you can increase it from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. You can go up to sometimes 24 hours. So that is very important. But at the same time, we know that thrombolysis in COVID has some controversies because if there's an inflamed myocardium, associated myocarditis, you can have bleeding within the myocardium. And we also know that thrombolytic therapy, only about 60 to 70% of the persons it works. In 30% it does not work, and in those 30% where the symptoms continue, ECG does not change, one has to go quickly to the cath lab. Next slide. So even if the patient is going for thrombolysis, it's always recommended that the cath lab should be alerted, because if the patient is continuing to have ischemia, he needs a angioplasty called rescue angioplasty. And anyway, the patient who has responded to thrombolytic therapy also, one needs to take them to the cath lab within 24 to at the most 48 hours for a very stable person, because there is usually an underlying blockage on which the clot has formed. And the post PCI protocol, which we follow for most of our patients, that means good dose of dual antiplatelet therapy, high dose of statins, like 80 milligrams of atorvastatin, 40 of rosuvastatin, and all the other things which we give for myocardial infarction post-MI treatment are to be given even in these patients. Next slide. But there are some ST elevation mimics. That means a marked ST elevation comes, frank case looks like a myocardial infarction. You take the person to cath lab, normal angiogram. Mechanism not clear, but possibly myocarditis. And a concern that lab may be overwhelmed by such cases has been raised. But then it is always very important to take the patient as early as possible to the cath lab to come to a diagnosis. Echocardiography sometimes can be useful, as I previously pointed out, by showing that is a generalized problem of the heart, myocardium, or there is a regional wall motion abnormality which favors, if one region of the heart is not contracting well and the person has an abnormal ECG, it favors more of a angioplasty-like problem. That means you need to deobstruct the artery. Next slide. Now this is a ECG of a patient. As you can see, full-blown ECG of a myocardial infarction, ST elevation in inferior leads, ST depression in anterior lead, and patient had an absolutely normal coronary angiogram. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. Again, marked ST elevation, full-blown coronary, problem. It looks like marked ST elevation in anterior leads, and the patient has a normal coronary arch. So you can get these, mimics, but at the same time, it is not possible to say which is going to have a normal artery. So it's better to treat them as a myocardial infarction. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, there are anecdotal cases in the literature where everything looked like a myocardial infarction, but it was coronary arteries were normal. And these patients, when they were supported by therapy for COVID, by giving immunoglobulins and giving them steroids, giving them antiviral therapies in persons who had renal problems associated, renal replacement therapy, and they recovered completely. So although there are anecdotal cases, but then these should be kept in mind. Next slide. This is again a case in which coronaries were normal, ECG grossly abnormal, and it was formed that it was a form of a cardiomyopathy, which again reversed. Next slide. Now, primary PCI, as I told you, is the treatment of choice because it provides high flow, normal flow in the coronary arteries within a very short period of time in 90 minutes and in a very large percent of patients, about 95% of cases you can get this. There's a less risk of bleeding, there's a less risk of stroke, and outcomes are very good. Next slide. As you can see, as compared to thrombolytic therapy, which shows only a 17% reduction in the mortality, angioplasty shows a 34% reduction in mortality as compared to thrombolytic agents. So wherever possible, a direct angioplasty is always advisable. Next slide. Now, when a patient comes during this period, we don't know whether the patient has a COVID or not, and there's always an asymptomatic period when the virus is being shedded and he comes to the emergency. We don't know what it is. So in that situation, even a chest CT, thorax, and all that, which is useful, is not possible which is possible in an elective setting. It is not possible in the usual, when you are, rushing against time. And also we know that if you take a patient for primary angioplasty, he can have a cardiac arrest. And if you resuscitate a patient with cardiac arrest, it's an aerosol generating procedure. That is the reason all the persons in the cath lab who are close to the patient have to be in complete personal protection equipment is recommended for all who are involved in the primary angioplasty when you don't know the COVID status of the patient. Next slide. Now, that is how, a doctor looks like when the person is doing a cath lab procedure where you don't know about the COVID status. Next slide. So protection of the staff of cath labs is extremely important. At the same time, we like to minimize the bleeding and minimize the complications. So our services should be, shielding the members of the staff. If the staff members who are at the highest risk from COVID, people who are more than 60 years of age, who have, lung conditions, who have hypertension, diabetics, such kind of staff should be redeployed to areas where patients are not facing the doctor is not facing these patients. And then personal, primary angioplasty should be performed as early as possible within 120 minutes, within 2 hours of the symptom onset. As soon as the patient arrives, everything in the cath lab should be kept ready. And we usually prefer to do a procedure from the radial artery because the chances of bleeding are less and the person can be mobilized very early. Next slide. And then patient has to be with a surgical mask and the staff which is there has to be with all the protective equipments which most of us know by now. That is masks, caps, splash goggles. Similarly, the operating staff, circulating staff, all the staff members in the cath lab should be using the protective equipment. Next slide. A dedicated cath lab, if there are multiple cath labs and the hospital does see COVID patients frequently, then a cath lab could be dedicated for cath lab, for COVID patients. But if it is not possible, as happens in large number of hospital which has only one cath lab, in that situation, keep the equipment packed in a state of readiness, and as soon as the patient is done, sanitize the procedure before the lab, before the patient comes in and after the patient goes. And if there are some stable patients waiting, postpone them because one has to give urgent consideration to a patient who has come with an acute heart attack. And then in the lab, there have to be designated areas where you put on the personal protective equipment, these gowns and other things, and where you remove them, donning and doffing areas which we all know. And they should lab should have sufficient number of these personal equipments and the kind of masks and goggles. Next slide. The other important thing is during the procedure, minimum number of persons should be in the cath lab. All should have gears, which are safety gears, standard techniques to be used. Don't be heroic. Open the artery which is causing the heart attack. Don't go in for opening all the bystander arteries, and do not get into exotic procedures like intravascular imaging and all that, which is time consuming, can produce complications. You need assistance for that. So be specific, save the life, open that particular artery, and be done with it. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, if in the cath lab again, if the operators who are in full, protection, they are doing the procedure and a cardiac arrest occurs in the cath lab, all the members who have been standing there without these PPEs around the fringes of the lab must leave the cath lab immediately before cardiopulmonary resuscitation maneuvers are started. Cath labs should have negative pressure facilities, although only few of them have such. And alternative is to keep always after a cath lab procedure, keep the lab clean, sanitize it. And if multiple patients with heart attacks are coming, sometimes it happens two patients come simultaneously, one has to risk stratify which patient needs the procedure quickly where he is sicker, and which patients one can wait, or that particular patient can be given the tenecteplase or a fibrinolytic agent, and to increase the time window and then take to the cath lab. So that all is the important message for the persons who are handling such sick patients. One has to prioritize. Next slide. Very high risk patients, I already told you that if the patient is very sick, very low pressure, and you think that it is difficult for you to handle such a patient, don't waste time. Futility should be considered. But if you decide that a patient can be made to be salvaged and you have the equipment, it can be challenging, then you make everything supportive therapies to be used, make them available. No half-hearted job. Thank you. Next slide. If the anatomy of the arteries is such, you think that bypass surgery may be required. It is a very difficult decision. Next slide. Where the lesions you think cannot be managed by bypass surgery, you should have a multidisciplinary team which looks at the angiogram, and if the surgeons feel they can do a better job, which is very complex because many of the surgical teams during this era are not working because of a multiple number of people required, which poses a undue risk and harm. And then again, angioplasty of one particular artery, which can save the situation, would still be preferred wherever possible. So it's a difficult decision, and such decisions have to be taken by a heart team, which is a multidisciplinary team. Next slide. Now, it appears that we are seeing less number of patients with acute coronary syndrome needing acute intervention, especially in the beginning period in April, May, uh, when COVID lockdowns had just started in March. It appeared that less number of patients are coming. So we did a kind of a survey. Next slide. And we sent questionnaires to 58 centers of the country who were admitting patients with both ST elevation and non-ST elevation MI. And the study period was between 15th March to 6th April. And we compared it with preceding 22 days when the COVID alarm hadn't come. And then what did we see? Next slide. We saw there was a significant reduction by about 53% in the number of patients who had come to get treated to the hospital. And there was a 50% reduction in ST elevation myocardial infarction and a 56% reduction in non-ST elevation MI. So that was the finding seen in a large number of hospitals. Some of the hospitals did not get any patients, some of them got much less number of patients, and some got only 50% of the patient. So the distribution of the patients clearly was much less than it used to be in the preceding period. Next slide. And the age range, the sex distribution, diabetes, hypertension, that was the same. That means the risk factors were the same, yet less number of patients were coming. And what could be the reasons for that? Next slide. Reasons for that, most important, as we know today, is that less number of patients were coming to the hospital because of the fear of getting COVID infection. And that is now we know that during the COVID era, we are having more deaths because of non-COVID problems because they're not approaching the hospital. They're sitting at home thinking that if they go out, they would get COVID. Also, some people believe that because of less pollution in the initial periods when there was no traffic, everything was closed, maybe less heart attacks occurred. People became more health conscious, started looking after their blood pressures and diabetes much more meticulously than before, and cutting down on smoking and resting more often. So there were many reasons, but the most important reason we know today is that patients did not come, and when they came after 2-3 months, they were already so sick that very much could not be done for salvaging them, and many of them are what we call as cardiac cripples with poor heart functions and dyspnea, recurrent heart failures. So that has been one of the unfortunate things of the COVID era because of the fear. Next slide. Now we know that when a patient comes, our goal is to manage the patient as early as possible if the patient is sick. Outpatient cardiology is not encouraged because we can handle these patients very well by video calls, by WhatsApp calls, and uh, those kind of stable patients for follow-up visits are not encouraged, although now the numbers have started increasing because they can be managed without their coming physically to the hospitals, because hospitals have all kinds of patients and in the corridors they can get infection. Next slide. So rapid antigen tests, as I told you, still have some issues, but the time to wait for the reports to come has reduced. But at the same time, we know that a patient who comes with an acute emergency, as we have been seeing, sometimes has to be taken as a possible COVID patient and yet be treated to save his life. Next slide. Next slide. Next. So having decided, we already know that cath lab should be kept with very few people, elective ventilation, and the patients who are COVID negative are shifted to a usual ICU, and the patients who are positive are managed after managing their acute process in the COVID wards with more specific instructions. Next slide. Now let me go to a case presentation. I hope it works. Next slide. This is a story of a 68-year-old person who had acute chest pain on 22nd of April. He was managed at home by telephonic consultations because he was scared to come out. And then he came to a flu clinic after 5 days, and where he was tested COVID negative. He was referred for ECG. Next slide. ECG had marked ST elevation, indicating an acute myocardial infarction. Next slide. Now that is not going to work because it is. Can I try my own slides now? Hello?
So please, I have stopped my screen. If you can share your screen, maybe the angiography would work.
Can you see the slide now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll straight go to this. Okay. See now, you can see the angiogram, you can see the blocked artery of this patient who has had a myocardial infarction actually 3 days back. But he was avoiding to come and he has a totally blocked artery here and another artery which has got a significant blockage. And you can see this artery, left anterior descending, is completely blocked. We have put in a wire in this and also protected the other vessel, putting in a stent. One more stent required there. What I wanted to show is that the flow in this artery is there, but it is slow because it's all a damaged myocardium. So we have also opened the circumflex artery. This patient had to be put on an intra-aortic balloon pump to support his circulation because he was very, very sick. And finally, you can see that the result looks good. And he was kept on dual antiplatelet therapy and all the important drugs. And he was, weaned off the balloon after 3 days and did well. The lessons learned from this particular case is patient presented very late, 5 days after heart attack. He came with a low output state. His blood pressure was low. And he developed slow flow during angioplasty because there was a large clot burden. The myocardium was already diseased, you know, was not functional. And he had other vessel also involved. So we intervened the other vessel and he finally improved, though not perfect, but was ready to go home. Now I'll tell you another case which we did last night. This is a person who is a police constable, a smoker, no other risk factor. He was on duty on a police beat. He had some chest discomfort after having dinner, which disappeared. But recurrence of the typical chest pain occurred after a few hours. He took some antacids and he presented to us at about 1:30 in the morning in the emergency room. And this was the ECG, which shows marked elevation of the T wave, peak T wave, and which is characteristic of a hyperacute myocardial infarction, indicating that he has just come in time and we did not know the COVID status. There was no family member to give consent. So he was given dual antiplatelet therapy, statins, and I instructed them if we are not sure, patient is not very clear, give him tenecteplase bolus. That means fibrinolytic therapy. Patient was relieved within 15 minutes and the ECG shows it has normalized. He's stable, and then we got a COVID test done because if we had to take him without a COVID test, we had to organize all the staff in the cath lab with PPE and all the equipments, and everything becomes a little difficult. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, but his ECG settled down, and this morning he was taken to the cath lab, and as you can see, there's a very tight block of just at the origin, a very dangerous site of the LED. And you can see a very tortuous kind of a artery and a ulcerated plaque here. So we did a angioplasty with using a cutting balloon first and looks now better. So this area looks better, and then we have another view and putting in a stent now. And following the result, you can see a very good result of this angioplasty. No obstruction, being a ostial lesion. You see the circumflex artery could have got compromised. We have kept in a wire there to protect it, but it did not require it, and the result was quite good. This is the final result. You can see the artery is flowing very well. And we did a left ventricular angiogram, and you can see except for this small area, which is not contracting very well, although contracting, his heart has been saved. That's how, early intervention helps And in this case, we got more time by using a thrombolytic agent to salvage him. And now this is the ECG which was taken, a few hours back, and it's absolutely normal. So the take-home message is that management of acute coronary syndrome remains a key priority, and the timely management is the key if we want to improve the survival, minimize the morbidity and mortality. We need to immediately give the medical attention, drugs, and think about urgent revascularization. Fibrinolysis can be done if time delay is unavoidable, which often happens in this era. Patient coming without COVID status known, consent not available, he doesn't have the finances, he doesn't have an insurance. So fibrinolytic therapy can buy time, but then catheter-based revascularization is required in most. This pandemic has created new challenges for these patients. Delayed presentations have become very common, especially as I showed you. Such patients are becoming, are seen very often, but we must spread the message that you should not shirk from coming to the hospital. If you are very sick, if you have acute chest pain, you should not be treated like a OPD patient who is stable patient. You must come to the hospital. And management of ACS remains a key priority. The treatment of ACS is very well established. Adhere to the standard pathway and then identify and treat that are not true ACS. You should identify them whom you think are not acute coronary syndrome or are too unstable, moribund, coming with a blood pressure of 30, 40 millimeters of mercury, cardiac arrest having twice before reaching the hospital. That situation, you should give preference to persons where you think you can salvage them. Wasting resources and limiting manpower is very, very important. So prioritization is the key. So that's what I wanted to, discuss with you, communicate with you. There were some glitches in the beginning, but I'm glad that, Simi managed the slides very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We are open for questions, and we already have a lot of questions. I think, should we start our question and answer?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first question is, what is the evidence related to age and gender in CVD and COVID? Any evidence, especially age, male, female, or age?
Well, I think COVID does not discriminate male from a female, young person from an old person. But younger people, healthier people, usually get the kind of infection which is well tolerated by the body. And we should also know that 75 to 80% of these individuals are asymptomatic. Unless you screen for them, you don't know whether they are positive or not. But these are the persons, if they are positive, and then they go home where there is their father, their mother, grandparents there, they can give infection to them. As you know, this virus is a very, very dangerously transmissible virus. And once people with comorbidities get involved, then their morbidity and mortality is high. Mortality in Europe and US, as we know, seems to be from the figures much higher than what we see. Our mortality in India has been close to 2%, whereas the mortality there has been 10%, 15%, 20%. Why? One of the reasons is that the lifespan of people there, average lifespan is 85, 90 years, whereas here it is 65 to 70 years. Now, a person who is 85, 90 years of age very often has multiple risk factors like diabetes, hypertension, previous bypass surgery, previous angioplasty, renal transplantation, immunosuppressive drugs on board. They get that kind of infection which is very, very, you know, making them very sick, and they have a very high mortality. That is one of the very important reasons.
Okay,
So,
coming to the
yes.
Important question. So I'm clubbing two questions together. Though you have already spoken about ACE inhibitors and ARBs, so we'd like to know, is it possible to go with higher doses of statins, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, and beta blockers?
Yeah, the guidelines remain the same. COVID does not change it. Only thing is that some of the newer drugs of COVID, remdesivir and some of the new antiviral agents which are coming, have some kind of a muscle pain which statins can also have. Maybe you might like to reduce the dose in those individuals, but otherwise asymptomatic COVID COVID patient who does not have desaturation and he has multiple risk factors. He has been on high dose of statins, a previous patient with angioplasty, a diabetic. They all should be given absolutely the high dose statin that should not be reduced because their risk of getting into inflammation is much more. And statins are one of the class of agents which are anti-inflammatory and safe. Similarly, ACE inhibitors, ARBs have been shown to be absolutely safe and go on to the maximum dose. There is no problem. If the patient is for hypertension on telmisartan, 80 milligrams, you can give it. Losartan, 100 milligrams, easy, can give it. Similarly, heart failure patients are on ACE inhibitors, ARBs, ARNI, that is sacubitril, and valsartan combination, that is perfect. You can continue that. No problem with that. There was some initial hesitation, but then science has shown they're absolutely safe. And it has also been shown that patients who were on ACE inhibitors when they got COVID because of their previous problems and they continued those had a better survival with COVID as compared to patients who stopped it.
That's good. We have a question. Can antiplatelet clopidogrel and ecosprin be given as a prophylaxis in COVID-19 patients? So I'm assuming because CVD patient is already taking these, only COVID-19 patients can clopidogrel and ecosprin be given as a prophylaxis?
For a prophylaxis means if the patient already has COVID and we know today that thrombus formation in the small vessels, pulmonary arteries and other things has become a known factor. We didn't know it in March, but we know today that many of them have clot formation and they need anticoagulants. They need low molecular heparin and newer anticoagulant agents like rivaroxaban and this dabigatran and other things. When we know that if you are giving them these agents, in that situation, bleeding risk becomes high if you continue both the antiplatelet agents. In that, I think you should de-escalate the antiplatelet therapy to just one, maybe aspirin, and stop clopidogrel because bleeding can be a major issue, especially if you are giving an anticoagulant. And most of the sick patients of COVID who have desaturation are put on anticoagulants, are put on steroids these days.
Okay. So our next question is from Dr. Kalaimani, and there are two parts of the question. Generally, steroids are contraindicated in acute MI, but in a patient with COVID and MI, is it safe? And the next part is, what is the dose if it is safe?
Acute myocardial infarction, there was a phase when steroids were being given to contain the inflammation, but after fibrinolytic therapy and primary angioplasty and other things came, there was futility, no use of them. Only use if they get, some kind of an inflammatory symptom like Dressler syndrome and other things post-MI. But if a patient gets COVID and has myocardial infarction and there is an indication for steroid, certainly go with the steroid like, 100 milligrams of hydrocortisone or 8 milligrams of dexamethasone. These are the standard doses. You go to high dose and then you can, put them on oral steroids and then taper them off over a period of 4 to 6 weeks when they recover.
Dr. Sunita, though we have already addressed the question, so I'll just take first part. What is the preferred anticoagulant?
Preferred anticoagulant while in the hospital to begin with, very often a low molecular weight heparin is started. And one can start the low molecular weight heparin, which has less bleeding than enoxaparin, and that is fondaparinux. 2.5 milligrams of fondaparinux which is available. Even Indian companies make it. It is quite cost effective also. Once a day, 2.5 milligram in comparison to 60 milligrams of enoxaparin twice a day for an adult. So we can give that. And for maintenance, as I told you, if the patient's renal function is good, patient is not a dialysis patient or something, I think the newer anticoagulant like rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram twice a day, along with aspirin, has been shown to be very effective.
Okay, so related again question, role of oral anticoagulant to prevent thrombosis in a post-recovery from COVID.
Well, in a post-recovery patient of a COVID pneumonia, where the CT scan had shown a florid pneumonia, these patients do require anticoagulants, and these are long-term till the time that pneumonia resolves. And very often, sometimes what happens, the pneumonia hasn't completely resolved for 3 months, 4 months also, especially in people who had underlying, lung disease, smokers, and chronic obstructive airway disease patient. You just continue this, because we know that in a person with the old myocardial infarction, along with many risk factors like multivessel disease, renal dysfunction, diabetes, elderly age, a stroke, COMPASS study has shown that giving them rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram twice a day for long term reduces mortality and reduces many thrombotic events. So in that situation, then it can be lifelong.
Okay. So can we start ACE inhibitors on patients of COVID myocarditis, hospitalized patients?
Yes, if the patient does not have hypotension, if the patient does not have hyperkalemia, and the patient has got a LV dysfunction. LV dysfunction, one of the standard treatments is ACE inhibitor and beta blockers. And ACE inhibitors, if the pressures are not very low, should be started in them. And as I repeatedly have been saying, that ACE inhibitors do not increase the chance of COVID getting into the myocardium. And also, it does not sort of make them more susceptible to any complication. This has been now very clearly shown. ACE inhibitors as well as ARBs.
So Dr. Krishna has a case, so he wants to discuss a case of STEMI. BP is high, the patient has cold and clammy peripheries. Beta blockers should be avoided. Is it right?
No, if the patient has bradycardia or severe hypotension, in that situation, beta blockers should not be started because they will produce further reduction in the blood pressure. These patients may require inotropes. Since you're saying cold, clammy skin and other things, that means there is a marked peripheral vasoconstriction. So these patients, if the pressure is all right, may be given intravenous nitroglycerin along with some, inotrope to dilate their peripheral vascular system so that the cardiac output improves. And once the cardiac output starts improving, for the long-term management of any heart failure, beta blockers are the agents which improve the survival markedly. But they have to be started slowly, small doses, and go on building up the dose. And the agents which have got the proof are bisoprolol, are metoprolol, as well as carvedilol.
Next question, Dr. Pritesh. He wants to know, should unstable angina and non-STEMI COVID suspected patient manage conservatively?
Well, unstable angina patient, if it is high risk unstable angina, that means elderly person, marked elevation of troponin, already on aspirin when he gets, he's got multiple risk factors, more than 2 or 3 risk factors like diabetes, hypertension, and his biomarkers are markedly elevated. They are very high risk patients. They have to be taken for a procedure early, but not as urgently as in a ST elevation myocardial infarction where, 60 minutes, 90 minutes wait also can be disastrous. But here patients, many of them, at least three quarters of them can be stabilized on dual antiplatelet therapy, high dose statins, low molecular weight heparin. And when they stabilize, depending upon how sick they are, it's always good to take them to cath lab at an early date. Most of them within 48 hours, I would say.
Dr. BB, any prophylaxis drugs to be taken by the patient from home before they are reaching to hospital?
Or patients of acute coronary syndrome.
Yeah, so we are assuming they have pre-existing disease, and if our doctors gets the call, so what are the prophylaxis drug which can be given to these patients by the time?
Yeah, safely one can recommend if the patient is already on aspirin, he can take 3 or 4 tablets of clopidogrel, and also statins. You can straight away tell them to take 40 to 80 milligrams of atorvastatin if it is easily available. Don't waste time in procuring that and waste 1 hour in that. If it is available, take it and come. These are the aspirin alone in a patient with ST elevation MI can reduce the mortality by about 15 to 20% if it is chewed.
Okay, we are almost with time, but then we'll take quick 1 or 2 questions. I'll just check if we have some. Okay, so what is the mortality among patients having both COVID and ACS? So I'm taking CVT. So what is the mortality rate in patients having these two together?
If the patient has a full-fledged COVID pneumonia and also acute coronary syndrome, full-blown, mortality is going to be high. It also depends on how energetic the patient is treated, both for COVID as well as acute coronary syndrome. This is the kind of patient who should be going to a specialized center for management, where there are treatment protocols available, where early management can be done, where there's an experienced staff. Otherwise, the mortality is very high. But in such centers also, I would say the mortality will be more than 50%.
Okay, coming to the last question. So if patients are started on ACE inhibitor or ARB for COVID patient, intensivists are stopping them. Please tell the pros and cons of newly starting ACE inhibitors or ARBs.
Well, ACE inhibitors and ARBs are started for a particular indications. Number one, if the patient is a diabetic hypertensive, ACE inhibitor ARB is very, very important. If the patient has LV dysfunction and heart failure symptoms or ejection fraction is less than 45%, ACE inhibitors ARBs are clearly indicated to improve the survival. But if the patient has become hypotensive, has gone to ICU because of very low blood pressure and other things, obviously ACE inhibitors, ARBs are not going to be started because they're going to produce further hypotension. So that particular is an individualized decision of the intensivist. But in general, if the pressures are high or pressures are normal, and if the patient has LV dysfunction, one does start ACE inhibitors ARB early.
That's it. So we are not taking any questions. So anything you want to say before we conclude?
I think acute coronary syndrome is a very catastrophic presentation of coronary artery disease. And it's also a condition where the most gratifying results come if you treat them as per the protocol, as per the guidelines. It gives you so much of gratification. A patient who comes very sick, you treat him in time, his survival is very high. His chances of going into heart failure is very low. The second case which I showed you today is a classical patient. He came very sick, thrombolized, taken to cath lab, and I showed you the LV angio at the end showing a nearly normal ejection fraction. Whereas that proximal LAD, if it had got occluded, I can assure you his ejection fraction would not have been more than 30%. So early energetic treatment of acute coronary syndrome always to be given. Medical management with aspirin, clopidogrel, high dose statin, low molecular heparin extremely important. give it. If you are a cardiologist, interventional cardiologist, be very active. If you are not, send him to the active center as early as possible so that he can be handled as early as possible, because this is the kind of patient whom you can really make much better. Unless you are aggressive, he's going to get into serious problems.
So we have got a special request from Dr. Nazmul Islam, and I think he has requested. So I'd like to take, though we have already announced that we are concluding, but just last question on very special request from Dr. Nazmul. Is it
Sure.
compulsory to confirm COVID-19 through RAT or RT-PCR before primary PCI, considering high community transmission status in India and Bangladesh?
The point is that acute ST elevation MI, when the patient comes, has to be revascularized as early as possible. Now it depends upon the facilities the hospital has. If you have a cath lab working 24 into 7, and also you have to look after your personnel by saving one patient, if you get your staff infected and close down the cath lab for weeks together, which has happened in many cath labs in this country also. In that situation, one has to be very careful that you manage the patient as if the patient is a COVID positive patient till the time the result comes. Yes, RT-PCR is one of the best methods to diagnose COVID, and the results now do come within a few hours as compared to in April, May, when the results used to come after 26 hours, 48 hours, and all that, because the facilities were very limited. Sample had to be sent to some other center, sometimes, to a different city also. So those things have improved. We have learned a lot about COVID treatment in the last 6, 7 months. More drugs are coming, but I must say that we still have too much to learn, so much to learn about this viral disease, because any new therapy which is coming is not a curative therapy. It is just shortening the hospital stay of moderately sick patient. The patient who gets onto the ventilator, I think we have very small things to offer besides ventilation and steroids and anticoagulants, and they continue to have a high mortality. Vaccine, we are talking a lot about vaccine, and we should remember that vaccine is only going to increase the immunity to handle the COVID infection better, and it cannot be abbreviated. The procedure for vaccine coming cannot be abbreviated. Some, that's great, Russian vaccine, other thing, they have abbreviated the stage 3 is a very important, phase 3 is a very important phase, and that abbreviating that is not as per the guideline. And also, once the vaccine comes, you have to see the group of people who get the vaccine, what happens to them in the next year. One is safe, it is safe, it will not give any problem. Other is whether it is efficacious, whether you are getting less COVID and your mortality of COVID is decreasing. That's going to take 1.5 years. Take it from me.
Okay, so this brings us to the end, and thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful session. And I think we have enjoyed a lot. I'm sure, I think participants would agree. It was a very informative session, and we sincerely hope we have met your academic expectations. I would like to inform all the participants that BMJ is coming up with a 3-month course on acute coronary syndrome. And we are touching upon topics on ACS, stable angina, unstable angina, STEMI and non-STEMI. The aim of this course, it's a short course, the aim is to help clinicians provide better management of patients with IHT. So do visit our website, education. Sure, sir, sure, please.
Let me add to what Simi has said, because I'm also involved in making that course. It's really very good. And we have, addendums in all the chapters taking care of this region. Our problems, lack of some infrastructure, lack of some drugs, cost, the lack of insurance, everything has been taken into consideration. And then in every, chapter, there are some questions also and answers also, and then why that answer is correct, justification based upon
Yes.
literature. So I
Yes.
think more and more persons, more and more, colleagues should get into this, and is going to be very, very useful. And I think you should be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Especially for all the participants who are attending this webinar, so there's a discount of 10%, which will be applicable for all the participants who are attending right now. And it is, the validity is for 1 week. So it is valid till 24th September 2020. And you just have to write to us. And if you have participated, we'll provide you with a discount and you'll be able to pay the course fee. Another thing before I end, we are sending you the email for the feedback. Please feel absolutely free. Let us know how you felt about what are the different things which you want us to address, what went right, what went wrong, what are the areas of improvement. And I think with this, this brings to the end. And before we conclude, stay safe and have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you so much. And we have taken some extra time. So apology for that. Thank you so much and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simi. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.